went to Air Cadets and was determined I was going to be a lady pilot and it'd all be fine, because if you just worked really hard, you could be a pilot. But then I realised quite quickly that I wasn't even tall enough to sit in a jet, so eventually I left Air Cadets. I think the desire to fly probably didn't leave. It began back when I was at university, so I went to Hereford and studied a BA honours degree in design crafts. I started playing around with characters there, and it wasn't a conscious decision to make fairies particularly. It was in response to a brief, and so I made one very traditional gold with a skirt and really ornate wings. And there was just something about that character that then led me to work through a process of discovering what fairies could be, what they could look like. And so I started looking at bugs and beetle bums, and I think that's where the fat bottomed fairy comes from there. So that's where they started, and then I happened upon a book of Victorian gadgetry and invention in the library whilst I was there, and just found myself sitting and laughing. It was just so humorous, and I seemed to start to pull the two influences together, so looking at characters but also looking at the inventions and the humour that surrounds the fact that they're so ridiculous, so old-fashioned, or just a bit of a silly idea. And there's that similar humour that goes with the fact that I'm inventing gadgets and contraptions for fairies. So I've developed a species of fairies. I spend my time thinking about what they need, their necessities and requirements, the things that they have to overcome, the perils that they face in day-to-day life, and most recently the amount of work they have to do. When I first started making them, I would draw every body shape out. I would draw head after head, looking at the distance between the eyes and the position on the cheeks and the angle of the smile, and I would work out the character prior to making them. I think through development and time they kind of grow out of the materials now, so I will be on a blank table and it will be something that starts off a fairy character, so it might be a particular button that's beautiful, a beautiful colour, or it's got something beautiful about it, or it might be a particular pod that I've decided will be a helmet, and that colour and texture will start off a sort of mood board that develops on the desk. I tend to work on heads in series, so I might have 8 heads to choose from, and I'll start to put them together as an idea, and then I go and stitch the bum, the body, the flight suit. But I also do the bigger inventions as well, and when I make those, so the flying machines, the flight simulators, all of those kind of things take a lot more planning. So with them comes sketchbooks full of drawings. I have to create all the cogs so that they look like they would move. So it's very important that they look like they really would work if they just set off into motion. I see myself as inventing from fairies, and that is the thing that interests me the most, because I have this species of fairies now. I know how they are going to look. I imagine them very easily in my head before I make them, and it's the inventions that go with them that captivates me, that interests me, that challenges me. I think being an inventor in this sense is a little bit similar to being a storyteller. You're kind of inventing the narrative that runs with them. When I create a crash helmet, it's because I've been thinking about what would happen to a fairy that is particularly clumsy and can't get from A to B without having some sort of mishap. Or, you know, an aerodynamic helmet for a fairy that's battling winds and all sorts of adverse weather conditions. So I am trying to solve these imaginary problems. The fairy duty, as far as I can see, is that they have to collect fairy dust. They have to identify it before they can collect it, and then once they've collected it, they have to sprinkle it. And that's a massive, massive job for the fairies. The fact that they're having to work so hard and that they have a very strong work ethic, I think is reflective in me. I work very hard, so perhaps that's where that comes from. Because if it didn't, then they'd all be sort of leisure fairies, wouldn't they? Having a good time, sunbathing. And I think sometimes at first glance you can think, that fairy's having a right nice time on that vehicle. But then when you read and you think about it a little bit more, you realise actually they're pretty busy. I think even if I wasn't making fairies, I would imagine that I would be striving to make people smile through whatever it was that I made.